I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the new Kia Sportage. The Kia Sportage is a midsize SUV that competes against popular crossovers here in Australia like the Toyota RAV4, the Mazda CX-5 and its cousin, the Hyundai Tucson. And to be honest, the previous gen, or the outgoing Sportage, was actually a bit of an underrated SUV, particularly in diesel all-wheel drive form. But the new Sportage, well, design-wise, it's certainly going for the jugular in terms of getting your attention. This is the new opposites united design language that Kia are shifting their cars to, and I think you'll agree with me that it's pretty darn memorable, particularly in this jungle wood green. Now, the Sportage I have behind me is the GT-Line, which is again going to sit at the top of the range here in Australia. We're not going to be able to drive it just yet. Today I'm going to give you a preview of what to expect when the Sportage lands down under later in 2021. We'll take a close look at the interior of this GT-Line, the back seat space, the boot, and then I'll walk you through the engine options and how Kia have tuned the dynamics for Australian roads. But before we get started, make sure to hit subscribe down below the video. As I mentioned, the Sportage that I've brought along today is the GT-Line, so we can see all of the available features on this car. That said, the GT-Line will sit at the top of a 4-strong Sportage lineup here in Australia. And the big news is that even though the lower specs of the Sportage will probably still appeal as a fleet vehicle, because Kia are clearly aiming for a 5-star ANCAP rating given there's a centre airbag between these seats, there's no more sort of true stripped out base model. All Sportages have a leather steering wheel. They all get LED headlights as standard, which really improves how it looks from the front end. But of course, here at the top of the range, this is a private buyer's delight, because while the last Sportage interior was high quality, the appearance was really, I guess, functional and pragmatic. The new one is absolutely immersive in terms of design. It's a huge step up in perceived quality in here. It feels truly special and it looks like a car twice the price. Now, not all of the materials can, I guess, cash the checks that they're writing, that you'll still be able to find some harder surfaces in here that remind you this is a mainstream SUV and not a luxury SUV. But for the most part, the new Sportage comes off really well. I especially like this almost Porsche Taycan-like curved display up here, which incorporates two 12.3-inch screens. That looks really special. And the fact it doesn't have a cowl doesn't seem to matter because the screens themselves are really bright. But of course, we'll have to wait to drive it to see how that works in practice. The software on the screens is Kia and Hyundai's latest infotainment system. It works well, and the big size certainly helps. It's fairly responsive to the touch. Apple CarPlay and Android Auto are included, but you'll need a cable to use them. But in front of us, we have digital gauges with blind spot cameras included, which is fantastic. Still the best blind spot monitoring system that you can get on really any new car. Beneath these screens, we have this really nice sort of open pore or textured looking wood trim, and then a very, very cool shortcut panel where initially we've got shortcuts for navigation and media, but just one tap away, it switches the whole panel and the dials to climate. That's a really interesting touch. Again, not something I've seen for quite a while, if ever. Looking down here on this sort of bridge center console, we've got a rotary shifter for the automatic gearbox, and we've got controls for the heated and cooled seats. And speaking of those seats, here in the GT-Line, they're actually quite an attractive, not quilted, but certainly patterned black leather appearance. And it feels pretty comfortable. Again, I'll need to do a few hours in the saddle to really report on that. But we've got memory, we've got electric adjustment, we've got two-way lumbar, so all of the bona fides certainly seem to be there. Big sunroof in this car as well, dark headlining, so it all comes off as, you know, a little sporty, a little luxurious. As for storage, we've got a very Volkswagen Tiguan-esque cup holder arrangement here. Ahead of the shifter, we've got wireless charging, USB-C, USB-A, 12 volts. We've got an armrest with more space. We've got bottle holders in the doors, not too big though, and they sit next to Harman Kardon speakers. We've got an 8-speaker Harman Kardon system that promises to sound pretty good. Just like the new Hyundai Tucson, which shares bits and bobs with this half-generation newer Kia Sportage, Kia have opted to stretch this SUV to give a bit more rear legroom and more boot space, as we'll check out in just a second. And that's worked to dramatic effect, because despite the fact this is a mid-size SUV, the legroom here in the second row is more like a large SUV. Now, the trade-off is that unlike the Sorento, there's no available third row, so the 5 seats you see here is what you get. But for 5 people, the new Sportage is actually very comfortable accommodation. So for myself at 6 foot, headroom is no issue beneath this panoramic sunroof. Legroom is amazing, tow room is excellent, and even this middle seat is usable. It's a bit of a perch, but there's almost no step or hump in the floor down there, so you could certainly use it if you needed to. Air vents, I see them on this car. I don't know whether they're range wide, but previously on the outgoing Sportage, they were range wide, so hopefully that has stayed. We've also got a variety of sort of interesting additions back here. We've got little bag hooks on the back of the seat. We've got a map holder on both seats as well. And then we have this rather interesting looking coat hanger on the back of both of the front seats. Plus, it's interesting to note that the seat back USB ports here, which have been borrowed from cars like the Kia Sorento, have actually shifted to USB-C in the new Sportage. Now, you might not have cables for USB-C yet, but you'll want to get them because it charges much faster than the old USB standard. We also have a flip-down armrest with 2 cup holders. Big windows. We do regress to hard plastic on the doors back here, but we still have that nice sort of wood trim, and there is padding on the armrest. So, you know, all in all, it feels comfortable, and I could happily do a few hours back here, I reckon. While the front end of the new Sportage will definitely polarize, some people will love it, some people will think it's way overdone. I think here around the back, the new Sportage is actually a really handsome vehicle. It's a little bit more coupe in its silhouette than the last version, which was quite traditionally wagon bodied, but you can see it wears Kia's new insignia really quite nicely here. And the fact that it's fairly free from badges is something we see fairly often on earlier builds of new Hyundai and Kia cars. I wouldn't be surprised if when it enters production, we have a bit more clutter over here, but hopefully not. Now, it looks as if the taillights are joined by a sort of heck blender reflector or light, but I don't think they are. I think this is just black plastic because the reflectors are actually down here in this sort of diffuser assembly, but either way, it looks pretty cool. Powered tailgate on this high-spec variant gets out of your way eventually, and so opens up to reveal a 637-litre boot. Absolutely no steps, so getting your suitcases in easily is no sweat. As you can see, more than enough room for the 3 chasing cars suitcases, and they sit underneath the cargo blind, which is better than we can say for some rivals. Here in the boot, we've got a 12-volt socket. We've also got latches to remotely drop those seats there in the back, and we have a full-size spare across the range, which is pretty impressive. Mid-size SUVs are the most popular type of car on sale here in Australia, and so that means that the manufacturers, like Kia, tend to bring in a lot of choice, because when you've got a lot of different buyers, many buyers, you need to offer them lots of different engines and trim combinations. And so while the Sportage that I've brought along today is a pretty nice one, it's a GT-Line with a turbo petrol engine, you can certainly get much lower end specifications. You can get a diesel. So I just thought I'd run you through some of the specs and some of those engines available. So the base Sportage continues to be the S, then there's the SX, the SX Plus, and the GT-Line. We don't have pricing on any of these cars yet, but we do expect it within a few weeks. So we'll post a little comment when that happens, once we have those prices. Now, what's important to remember is that if you're interested in the turbo petrol engine, you can only get that on the top 2 variants, the SX Plus and the GT-Line. On every other variant, you have a choice of a 2-litre naturally aspirated port-injected 4-cylinder petrol engine producing 115 kilowatts of power and 192 Newton meters of torque, and you don't want that engine. It's a carryover engine. Loads of Hyundais and Kias have had it, and it's fine, but it's thirsty and it's slow. The diesel is optional across the range, and I won't know until I drive them, but in the old Sportage, the diesel was the engine to get. The turbo petrol is effectively the same as the one in the Tucson, and in that car, the diesel is also the one to get, so I imagine the Sportage diesel will probably still be my pick. Now it makes 137 kilowatts of power and 416 Newton meters of torque, and it comes with all-wheel drive. That's heaps of torque for a mid-size SUV, and it's by far the most frugal engine, so that's certainly one to keep in mind. But the new addition is the 1.6 litre turbo petrol, 132 kilowatts of power, 265 Newton meters of torque, and as I mentioned, it's exclusive to the top two variants, so that is another more premium option that you could choose over that base petrol engine. Now, impressively, in order to go for those high standards of safety and potentially a 5-star NCAP rating, we don't know, but potentially, there's a really good range of safety tech that's standard on every Sportage, including that center airbag I mentioned, but also AEB with junction assist, lane keep assist, and a few other technologies that help out day to day. So those are my first impressions of the new Kia Sportage. Very much looking forward to a drive of this new generation midsize SUV, because in static form, I think you come away from it thinking this is pretty impressive. It looks interesting outside, and I think fortune sometimes favors the bold in this sort of segment. There won't be any forgetting the aesthetic of it, and I actually think in this green GT-Line specification, it's pretty handsome. The interior has a huge amount of wow factor to it, and the broad spread of the lineup should mean that there's something for everyone. As for prices, we'll be finding those out soon, but I'd probably have in mind the range kicking off from somewhere in the low to mid $30,000 area, heading up through to maybe 50 grand for this top spec car. We'll soon find out. Keen to know your impressions. Let me know down below this video in the comments. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.